Last time we spoke about the 5th encirclement campaign against the CCP. After surviving 4 encirclement campaigns by the NRA, the CCP faced an intensified 5th campaign in 1933, as the Japanese invaded Manchuria and northern China. Despite growing in numbers, the CCP struggled against the KMT's modernized army, equipped with German weapons and strategies. A combination of blockades, fortified positions, and superior tactics eroded Red Army strength. By 1934, after significant losses, the Red Army retreated, marking the campaign's end and signaling the start of the CCP's eventual Long March. In the battle between the NRA and the Red Army, the NRA employed strategic counterinsurgency techniques to block Red infiltration and gain local support through loyalty and economic pressure. Meanwhile, the Red Army, hampered by internal issues and a shift in leadership towards the 28 Bolsheviks, struggled with morale and mass recruitment of untrained peasants. As the Red Army attempted aggressive tactics and reforms, they ultimately faced defeat, leading to their strategic retreat in the historic Long March. This episode is the Fujian Rebellion of 1933. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia. Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all of that, you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube, and my podcast known as Echoes of War on all podcast platforms. Over on both of those, I just released an episode covering World War II and other debauchery. Basically, it's an episode highlighting the dumb and hilarious moments of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account found over at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. On either, you get access to the exclusive podcast with about 25 plus episodes ongoing. You also get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. I'd recently put up a poll, and it seems the next exclusive episode is going to be Who Financed World War I? So hey, if that's of interest to you, please go check it out. In the previous episode, during the 5th encirclement campaign, I briefly mentioned a rebellion taking place in Fujian province. Now this story actually crosses over a few we will be covering, such as the 5th encirclement campaign already mentioned, but also the Japanese invasion of Shanghai in 1931, part of the Mukden incident. So it's a bit tricky for me to cover this one without giving away too much of what I will be speaking about later, but I will try my very best to be mysterious. Now, the key player I guess you can say to this story is the 19th Route Army. The 19th Route Army's history can be traced back to the 1st Division of the Guangdong Army. In 1926, this division underwent a significant transformation, becoming the 4th Army of the NRA. At the time, Li Jishen was appointed as its commander, with Chen Mingshu serving as the commander of the newly formed 10th Division. Other notable figures included Jiang Guangnai as the deputy commander, and Tai Tingkai leading a subordinate regiment. All of these men would become key players in the rebellion. During the Northern Expedition, the 4th NRA Army distinguished itself with numerous successful campaigns. The 10th Division was subsequently expanded into the 11th Army. This new formation went on to play a pivotal role during the Central Plains War of 1930-1931, assisting Chiang Kai-shek in his struggle against warlords' anti-Chiang coalition. As a result of this success, the 11th Army was reorganized into the 19th Route Army, with Jiang Guangnai assuming the role of overall commander and Tai Tingkai becoming the new army commander. Following these developments, the 19th Route Army then went on to be part of the 3rd encirclement campaign. Now again, not to give away too much, but in 1931 the Mukden incident broke out, initiating a 15-year war between China and Japan. Most of the action took place in Manchuria, pouring slightly into northern China and Inner Mongolia, but there was an expedition performed in Shanghai. In many ways, it was like a dress rehearsal for what would go down in 1937 during the Bloody Battle of Shanghai. During the crisis, known as the September 18th incident, the 19th Route Army was redeployed to Shanghai. This transition occurred during a tumultuous period when Chiang Kai-shek faced significant political pressure and was forced to resign. The Nanjing national government, dominated by the Guangdong faction, saw Chen Mingshu appointed as the commander of the garrison responsible for defending Beijing and Shanghai. Now, this was a hyper-chaotic time for China, a particularly rough time for Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was dealing with multiple external-internal threats to China and his position as generalissimo. First off, his encirclement campaigns against the Reds were not going well at all. His men were not accustomed nor trained properly to face guerrilla warfare. When they assaulted the Jiangxi Soviet, they were entering strange territory, and they were greeted by country folk as enemies. The Reds, in contrast, felt at home amongst the villagers. For years, they had lived alongside the people and built friendships, forging connections with a key aspect of communist strategy. Whenever Chiang Kai-shek's forces came too close for comfort, the guerrillas seamlessly blended into the local population. They established their own Soviets, spread their ideology at will, and disappeared when soldiers approached. They were like a fluid army. Over time, the Chinese public became less concerned about the ongoing presence of the Red Army, and more weary of the topic. Those not living in areas affected by communist infiltration struggled to grasp the urgency of this endless conflict and began to question whether the costs outweighed the benefits. Very little news was reported on the situation, and what was published came primarily from government sources, portraying it as a series of victories for the nationalists. This battle was a success for the nationalists, that one ended in a glorious triumph and such. The KMT troops had the Reds on the run, it seemed all the time. A few days later, another dispatch would reiterate the same points, as if the earlier battles had never even occurred. The front lines never seemed to shift significantly. Chiang Kai-shek maintained his position as generalissimo, like any other politician, through alliances. One of his key friends was Hu Hanmin. The relationship between Chiang Kai-shek and Hu Hanmin was never straightforward. Their shared history was marked by significant jealousy, and in February of 1931, they faced another separation. During a KMT conference, Hu Hanmin challenged the provisional constitution proposed by Chiang Kai-shek, arguing that it was prematurely defining various government functions. He claimed that Chiang Kai-shek was consolidating too much power for himself. Chiang Kai-shek countered that Hu Hanmin's concerns were mainly about party authority. This situation echoed their earlier disputes in Guangzhou, where they had debated theories under Dr. Sun Yat-sen's influence, but now their conflicts had much more weight and didn't end in mere discussion. Hu Hanmin, overwhelmed by his anger, resigned from the presidency of the Legislative Yuan, a significant position at the time. In response, a similarly agitated Chiang Kai-shek placed him under house arrest, or as the Chinese more delicately termed, in soft detainment. Initially, this fact was not disclosed. Hu Hanmin simply vanished. This was quite an extreme action for someone who advocated democratic processes, leading to a barrage of inquiries from curious Europeans directed at Chiang Kai-shek. What had happened? Where was Hu Hanmin? Why had the innocuous Lin Sen just been appointed as president of the Legislative Yuan? For a considerable time, the generalissimo remained silent, but eventually he reluctantly stated that Hu Hanmin was fine, quite fine. It was simply that his personal freedom was temporarily restricted. Boy, that's a pretty good line for any wannabe dictator. His personal freedom was temporarily restricted. That's a good one. This, of course, was all for his own benefit and that of the KMT. Without this restriction, the misguided individual might attempt to flee to Shanghai, which would only incite dissenting factions and provoke disorder. Everything was perfectly fine, as Chiang Kai-shek kept saying. The incident was added to the ever-growing list of accusations made by Chiang Kai-shek's opponents, who claimed he was becoming a tin. They argued that he was squandering the nation's resources to maintain his army, while pursuing insignificant communists who, if left just alone, might actually become good citizens. Rumors circulated that he was nurturing a group of young bullies reminiscent of the Italian blackshirts. Additionally, there were concerns about the shady Chen brothers. Furthermore, it was alleged that Chiang Kai-shek was in close contact with the gangster Tu Yue-sun in Shanghai, profiting immensely from the illicit opium trade through this connection. In fact, Chiang Kai-shek had recently declared that opium would be now a government monopoly, similar to that of the British in Hong Kong, as he needed the funds. And now, this latest scandal. Criticism of the generalissimo was rampant, especially amongst students. April passed, and the uproar over Hu Hanmin faded into discontented whispers, as the People's Congress approached, providing an opportunity for open discussion about the Provisional Constitution. However, by May the 5th, people were preoccupied with other concerns. The South was once again causing unrest, led by none other than Wang Jingwei, with Yu Jinshan involved as well. It began with the typical manifesto of circular telegrams signed by Wang Jingwei and the Jiangxi generals, who impeached Chiang Kai-shek for his wrongdoings. Another telegram soon followed from the warlords in Guangzhou, accusing the Generalissimo of assuming dictatorial powers. In response, Chiang Kai-shek convened an urgent meeting of KMT leaders, asserting that the allegations must be openly discussed and investigated. He should have been able to rely on the party's support during this crisis, but the situation was unusual due to Hu Hanmin's detention. Some members of his own faction seized the moment to betray him. Sun Fo and Wang Chonghui retreated to Shanghai before moving on to Guangzhou. Soon thereafter, the Guangzhou warlord declared an alliance between Jiangxi and Guangdong, united in their fight, and this was, of course, the Changgui War. On May the 25th, the Southerners issued an ultimatum. Chiang Kai-shek had to resign within 48 hours or face dire consequences. A few days later, they established a new national government in Guangzhou. Chiang Kai-shek announced his intention to suppress the rebels, but did not rush into action. Instead, there was more discussions, and even more discussions, in the neutral setting of Shanghai. Throughout June and most of July, these negotiations continued, with Chiang Kai-shek hoping to prevent a conflict that the nation could ill afford at that time. The Southerners persisted with their demands and their appeal to Japan for support, which would haunt them for a very long time. Their determination ultimately prevailed, and on July the 21st, it was announced in Guangzhou that a punitive expedition was underway. By mid-August, Bai Chongxi's army was advancing through Hunan on the old route to Nanjing. Chiang Kai-shek prepared for the confrontation, and the capital was on a high alert. Meanwhile, in the north, the Mukden incident broke out. In the south, the generals and their associates held back, anticipating that war would be declared at any moment. However, Chiang Kai-shek and his military advisors understood that he was even less equipped than Zhang Shiliang to initiate an offensive against a powerful foreign nation. There was the League of Nations, established presumably to address crises like this, as well as the Kellogg Pact. Chiang Kai-shek decided to refer the matter to the League of Nations, though his chances of favorable outcomes were slim. America, which might have otherwise been involved, was preoccupied with its own economic depression, and the British remained indifferent. The more impulsive factions in China believed this response was insufficient, and the dissidents in the South demanded a stronger approach. The students were the most incensed. On September the 28th, hundreds of students in Shanghai took matters into their own hands. They seized control of a train at the railway station and traveled to Nanjing, where they joined forces with fellow students from the capital's university. Together they marched 5,000 strong towards the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They pushed past the guards, stormed the ministry's office, forcibly dragging him outside, and they assaulted him. After recovering from his injuries in the hospital, the minister chose to resign. No shit. The students then initiated a sit-in strike, declaring they would remain in Nanjing until they received tangible action rather than mere diplomatic efforts. Authorities were unsure how to respond to them, as more pressing issues demanded the government's attention. It was clear that the South and Nanjing needed to resolve their differences, as public opinion strongly supported this. Despite the ungracious criticisms emanating from Guangzhou, where Yu Qinchen was vocally denouncing Chiang Kai-shek for his diplomatic failures, Nanjing sought to negotiate. In October, Chiang Kai-shek released Hu Hanmin from his mild detention, and he appeared none the worse for the unexpected break. Along with 3 others, he traveled to Shanghai for a peace conference with the Southern leaders. Hu Hanmin urged the Southerners to be reasonable and to cease calls for Chiang Kai-shek's resignation. Chiang Kai-shek would then remark, "Regardless of the right or wrong of the situation, if desired, all blame can be placed squarely on me." However, this uplifting scene was short-lived. As the Guangzhou faction continued to insist on Chiang Kai-shek's resignation, Hu Hanmin abruptly changed his stance and it escalated the demands. He suggested that not only should Chiang Kai-shek resign, but he should also be exiled from China entirely. The conference ended in pure chaos. Various proposals were discussed and quickly dismissed. The South remained resolute. Chiang Kai-shek simply had to go. The sit-in students, frustrated with just sitting idle, started to escalate their actions. Their numbers had been steadily increasing since the initial demonstration, with boys traveling to Nanjing from distant places. By the end of November, there were 12,000 of them. They marched again to the new government buildings, demanding that Chiang Kai-shek come out to engage in discussion. "War on Japan," they all shouted. Chiang Kai-shek made them wait in the cold winter weather for a full 24 hours before he finally appeared. He reprimanded them harshly, and he ordered them to return to school, leading to a subdued dispersal of the crowd. On December the 15th, Chiang Kai-shek capitulated to public pressure, and he resigned. Chiang Kai-shek yet again nonchalantly got up and left, heading home into the mountains. This left an extremely uneasy Sun Fu in the presidential chair, facing what looked like a full-blown Japanese invasion. The Japanese kept reiterating they were merely defending their citizens after the Chinese had attacked the South Manchurian Railway. But yeah, they were just conquering China. Sun Fu desperately looked for any veteran figures for help, but Hu Hanmin had fled for Hong Kong. Wang Jingwei, arguably the man responsible for forcing Chiang Kai-shek yet again to step down, was suddenly far too ill to do anything, as usual, and he retired to the Shanghai hospital. Meanwhile, all of the bankers had lost interest in the Nanjing government since Chiang Kai-shek had departed. The government literally lost its coffers. The government had no means to properly pay its armies. Now the entire time, the government had been tossing offers to Chiang Kai-shek to come back, but he was biding his time. Meanwhile, Eugene Chen demanded China break off diplomatic relations with Japan. He was told no, so he resigned, and he was quickly followed by Sun Fu. Now it was Wang Jingwei who was tossed into the presidential position, which he must have relished. However, it was just then when Shanghai was invaded. Chiang Kai-shek still held his honorary position as CEC over the special committee, so he simply waited and watched. Yet no one could manage the military like the Generalissimo, nor open the coin purses to fund it. Thus Chiang Kai-shek was brought back, but not really as Generalissimo. Now he had to work collaboratively with none other than Wang Jingwei. In 1932, the January 28th incident unfolded. Basically, the Japanese performed another false flag operation trying to legitimize an expedition into Shanghai. Japanese Marines began to land, and on January the 28th, they were attacking in full force. The 19th Route Army met the enemy in what became known as a month-long resistance against quite great odds. Chiang Kai-shek was being labeled a coward for not doing more against the Japanese, but he was keeping in touch with the commanders of the 19th Route Army by telegraph. He advised them to guard Luohu, a village just across the Yangtze, believing the Japanese would make other landings to cut them off there. General Tsai neglected to take the advice, and lo and behold, the Japanese made a landing, forcing the 19th Route Army to pull out. The entire situation looked incredibly bad for China. Fingers were pointed at the inept Nanjing government. Yet Chiang Kai-shek was much more focused on the encirclement campaigns against the Reds. The people angrily accused him of, quote, making war on his own people instead of attending the real threat of Japan. To this, Chiang Kai-shek replied, it is useless for China to talk of resisting Japan, when it has not yet stamped out the enemy in the midst. If China ventures to fight the Japanese, the communists will attack from the rear, and chaos will quickly overtake the whole country. The 19th Route Army was hailed as heroes, receiving a lot of recognition as a prominent anti-Japanese force. Despite Japan's attempts to reinforce its troops, Chiang Kai-shek's return to leadership saw further NRA forces dispatched to join the fight. Eventually, the conflict reached a resolution through diplomatic negotiations, resulting in the withdrawal of the 19th Route Army from Shanghai. With the Japanese threat averted for the time being, Chiang Kai-shek redirected his efforts against the Reds. On May the 21st of 1932, Chiang Kai-shek ordered the 19th Route Army to enter Fujian and to force the army to engage a civil war against the communists in Fujian. On December the 6th of that same year, Zhang Guangnai took over as chairman of the Fujian province, and Tai Tingkai was appointed as director of the Fujian Pacification Office and commander of the 19th Route Army. At this point, the leadership of the 19th Route Army were not at all happy with Chiang Kai-shek, who, to them, seemed to have done little to help them face the Japanese. They were not friendly to the CCP by any means, and they were actively suppressing communist organizations while fighting the Japanese. When they came to Fujian, they continued to suppress communists and supported people's anti-Japanese patriotic movements. On August 18th of 1932, the 61st Division of the 19th Route Army collectively executed 69 CCP members and suspected individuals outside the east gate of Zhuanzhou, and they also carried out mass killings of government workers from the Soviet area during their offensive against it. Despite this, the CCP and 19th Route Army did agree on one thing: the Japanese were a problem. After November the 22nd of 1933, as Japanese imperialism intensified in its invasion of China, the people across the nation once again launched a wave of anti-Japanese salvation movements. On January the 17th of that same year, the provincial central government of the Chinese Soviet Republic and the Revolutionary Military Committee of the Worker and Peasants' Red Army issued a joint anti-Japanese declaration, proposing 3 conditions for cooperation with any armed forces to resist Japan. Number 1 was an immediate halt to attacks on the Soviet areas, an immediate guarantee of the democratic rights of the people, and an immediate arming of the people to establish armed volunteer forces. However, Chiang Kai-shek's ruling group stubbornly persisted in its anti-communist and anti-people's policies, continuing to intensify attacks on the Red Army, and on May the 31st, he signed a peace agreement with the Japanese. Chiang Kai-shek was met with another wave of opposition across the nation for appeasing the Japanese. The 19th Route Army basically concluded the Generalissimo was not going to help wage a war against their enemy. Thus, in a rather insane fashion, the leadership of the 19th Route Army resolved to overthrow the Nanjing government so that they could unite the anti-Japanese forces and push for a national resistance. At that time, Chen Mingshu, an early leader of the 19th Route Army, who had gone abroad and had previously served as the vice president of the executive yuan of the national government, returned to China in May of 1933, and he devoted all of his efforts to oppose Chiang Kai-shek's Nanjing government. In Fuzhou, he secretly discussed 3 strategies with Zhang Guangnai, Tai Qingkai, and Deng Zizeng. The first was to unite with Guangdong and Guangxi to overthrow Chiang Kai-shek, supporting Hu Hanmin to organize an independent government. The second was to unite with Li Zongren and Bai Zhongxi of Guangxi, and Chen Qitang of Guangdong, seizing Guangdong. The last was to unite with the Red Army to resist Chiang Kai-shek altogether. As a result, neither the first nor the second strategies could be realized. Under Chiang Kai-shek's repeated orders to engage in a civil war, the 78th Division and the 62nd Division of the 19th Route Army faced severe blows from the Red Army in Fujian between July and September of 1933. Thus, the 19th Route Army found itself in a dire situation, where not engaging in anti-communist actions would lead to its annihilation by Chiang Kai-shek, while engaging in anti-communist actions would result in its destruction by the Red Army. Within this context of rising national anti-Japanese sentiment, the upper leadership of the 19th Route Army had to swiftly make a choice to unite with the communists to resist Chiang Kai-shek and fight the Japanese. On September the 22nd of 1933, Chen Mingshu's main ally, Chen Guangpei, who had participated in the Nanchang uprising and later left the CCP, secretly arrived at the command post of the 3rd Red Army Corps, stationed at Wangtai, to express the political stance of the 19th Route Army to the leaders of the Red Army. At the time, those being Peng Tukwei, Tong Taiyuan, and Yuan Guoping, regarding anti-Chiang resistance and cooperation with the Red Army. In October, Chen Gongpai accompanied Xu Minghong, the plenipotentiary representative of the 19th Route Army and Secretary General of its headquarters, to Rujin. On the 26th, he signed the preliminary agreement against Japan and against Chiang Kai-shek, with Pan Jiangxing, a representative of the Provisional Central Government of the Chinese Soviet Republic and the Worker and Peasants' Red Army. The main contents included both sides immediately ceasing military actions, temporarily defining a military demarcation line, restoring trade between both parties. The Fujian People's Revolutionary Government and the 19th Red Army both agreed to the existence and activities of all revolutionary organizations in Fujian, to allow freedom of publication, speech, assembly, and strikes, and immediately release political prisoners, among other provisions. The Soviet Provincial Central Government also sent Pan Jiangxing as a permanent representative in Fuzhou. Subsequently, Chen Mingshu, Li Jishan, Zhang Guangnai, Tai Qingkai, and others actively prepared to establish a brand new government and made military preparations against Chiang Kai-shek. On November the 20th of 1933, Li Jishan, Zhang Guangnai, Tai Qingkai, and the representatives from over 100 cities across the country, along with 100,000 people from various sectors in Fuzhou, convened the National People's Temporary Representative Assembly in Fuzhou. The assembly issued the Declaration of People's Rights of the Chinese People's Temporary Representative Assembly and decided to establish the People's Revolutionary Government of the Republic of China. They elected Li Jisen, Chen Mingshu, Chen Yuren, Fang Yuseng, Tai Qingkai, Zhang Guangnai, Huang Qixiang, Xue Chen, Fang Zhenwu, Li Jiangda, Sa Zhengbing, Hu Gong'an, and 12 other members to the government, with Li Jisen as the government chairman. On November the 22nd, the People's Revolutionary Government was officially established, with the capital being set in Fuzhou. The People's Revolutionary Government Committee set up a military committee, an economic committee, and a cultural committee, chaired respectively by Li Jisen, Yu Xinxing, and Chen Mingshu, and they established a Ministry of Finance, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a Supreme Court, as well as a Political Security Bureau, led respectively by Zhang Guangnai, Zhang Yuren, Xue Qian, and Li Jiangda. The People's Revolutionary Government successfully issued the People's Revolutionary Government's Internal Telegram, the People's Revolutionary Government's External Declaration, the People's Political Program, 18 articles of minimum program and other documents, openly announcing anti-Japanese, anti-Chiang Kai-shek stuff, and proposed some domestic and foreign policies with certain progressive significance. The internal telegram of the People's Revolutionary Government announced the government's future mission. Number 1, it was to seek the liberation of the Chinese nation, to establish a truly independent and free country. 2 was to eliminate the counter-revolutionary Nanjing government and to establish a political power of the productive people. 3 to realize equal rights of all ethnic groups in the country. 4 to guarantee the absolute freedom and equality of all productive people. 5 to eliminate the influence of imperialism in China, to overthrow the warlords, eradicate the remnants of the feudal system, develop the national economy, and to liberate the working people. The declaration of the People's Revolutionary Government to foreign countries sternly pointed out that Nanjing's government was treacherous and warned the powers not to cooperate with Chiang Kai-shek. The declaration stated, "We believe that the policies of the pro-American and pro-League of Nations factions are based on dangerous principles. However, it must be recognized that the objective result of the pro-American and pro-League of Nations factions will put China under an international condominium system, which is no less harmful than Chiang Kai-shek's pro-Japanese policies. It is recognized that China's real power must be established on a national basis. We finally declare that overthrowing the Chiang Kai-shek regime is not only necessary for China's independence and the national salvation, but also for the military and economic interests of the whole world. In order to enhance the international security, we have to warn the powers not to make any loans to Chiang Kai-shek's government in Nanjing, whether it is money, goods, or weapons. We also declare that if any such loans are concluded in the future, the Chinese people and their revolutionary government will be completely denying them." The People's Political Program, which was 18 articles of the minimum program, declared, "China is a semi-feudal society under the rule of imperialists. Its greatest goal of the Chinese Revolution is to eliminate the imperialist domination in China, while at the same time to sweep all feudal forces and establish a government that fully represents the rights of the people." The 18 articles of minimum program were as such. Number 1, to abolish unequal treaties and renegotiate equal and mutually beneficial treaties with other countries. Number 2, foreign invested or foreign managed enterprises and cultural undertakings that are harmful to the interests of the Chinese nation must be restricted or confiscated. Number 3, to sort out the new and old foreign debts. All political loans that harm the country should be absolutely denied. Others should be repaid conditionally. Number 4, implementing foreign trade controls. 5, strictly implement absolute tariff autonomy. 6, open up the political system and deny all political rights to counter-revolutionaries who are dependent on imperialism and warlords. 7, all nationalities within China are equal, may freely unite for revolution, and recognize national self-determination. 8, ensure the people's absolute freedom of body, residence, speech, assembly, association, strike, demonstration, and publication. 9, implement universal suffrage. 10, abolish all excessive taxes and levies. 11, the principle of everyone who tills the land owns the land was established, and land was distributed according to the number of people. Forests, mines, and rivers were completely nationalized. 12, all important banking and transportation enterprises shall be under state control. 13. Use of political power and state capital to support the scientific development of agricultural production. 14. Usury is strictly prohibited. 15. Unscrupulous merchants will be eliminated and the people's daily necessities will be sold under the state monopoly. 16. To formulate agricultural and industrial laws, improve the lives of farmers and workers, and ensure the development of agricultural and industrial organizations. 17. Promote universal education. And lastly, 18. Implement conscription, arm the people, and assist them in their anti-imperialist and economic political struggles. After the establishment of the People's Revolutionary Government, it caused a great stir domestically and internationally. However, due to Wang Ming's leftist closure policy, the local party organization in Fujian initially adopted a hostile strategy towards the People's Revolutionary Government. It wasn't until early December, after the Fuzhou Central Municipal Committee received a letter from the Central Committee dated on October the 30th addressing the Fuzhou Central Municipal Committee that all their comrades in Fujian would begin to adopt a proactive cooperation approach towards the People's Revolutionary Government and the 19th Route Army. After December the 29th, the Fuzhou Central Municipal Committee issued a declaration in the name of the, quote, Far East Anti-Imperialist Non-War Anti-Fascist Alliance Fuzhou Branch, publicly calling for the establishment of an anti-imperialist united front. The People's Revolutionary Government also fully reprinted this declaration in its official newspapers, the People's Daily and the Guangdong Daily. The Fuzhou branch then mobilized people from all walks of life to establish the Committee to oppose Kuomintang air raids and support the soldiers of the 19th Route Army against the Kuomintang. And I know all of this is due to translation, but my God, these committees are long in their titles. Their purpose was to organize personnel to visit the stationed troops of the 19th Route Army to comfort the soldiers. The People's Revolutionary Government also adopted a cooperative attitude towards the economic struggles of worker organizations. On November the 18th, Chen Mingshu called for an emergency secret meeting of the 19th Route Army and other key figures at Fuzhou Rock in Gushan. The meeting took place at Longyuan Pavilion and was attended by those like Li Jishen, Chen Mingshu, Tai Qingkai, Zhuang Guangnai, Chen Youren, Wang Qixiang, Xu Qian, Li Xiangda, and over 10 other military commanders and the Chief of Staff of the 19th Route Army. The discussion, which lasted from morning until late night, revolved around heated debates concerning the timing of the uprising. Tai Qingkai advocated for postponing the uprising by 1 to 2 months for several reasons. Many generals in the 19th Route Army were still undecided or openly opposing the rebellion. The troops had not yet mobilized. Defenses were quite unorganized. Various forces had not yet surrendered, and traitors and spies were still active everywhere. Additionally, Guangdong and Guangxi were not providing any support, and Chiang Kai-shek was already aware of their plans. Tai Qingkai argued for more time to accelerate preparations without drawing immediate attention from Chiang Kai-shek. In contrast, Chen Mingshu and others believed that this was the last opportunity for a real uprising. They pointed out that Chiang Kai-shek's forces were concentrated now in North China, and Jinpu, particularly in Jiangxi as well, where his main troops were engaged in the 5th Encirclement campaign against the Soviet area. They estimated that only 20,000 to 30,000 troops could be redirected to Fujian. Overestimating the political instability of Chiang Kai-shek's regime, Chen Mingshu believed that once the 19th Route Army raised the flag of rebellion, support from other regions of China would simply follow. He also felt confident that one division of the 19th Route Army could resist 2 or 3 of Chiang Kai-shek's divisions, and that with cooperation from the Red Army, even if Chiang Kai-shek deployed 10 divisions, they would somehow prevail. Chen Mingshu concluded that, regardless of the outcome, the effort would be heroic and they should proceed without hesitation. The meeting's opposing viewpoints led to intense discussions. Chen Mingshu, visibly passionate, declared that the revolution required sacrifice and that delaying any longer would mean submission to Nanjing. Tai Qingkai, while originally advocating for delay, conceded that the situation had reached a point of no return. He agreed to lead the 19th Route Army and fully back the new government. The meeting concluded with a decision to convene the National People's Provisional Congress in Fuzhou on November the 20th to officially declare the uprising against Chiang Kai-shek. Other topics discussed include replacing the Blue Sky, White Sun party flag, military and financial logistics, and the declaration drafted by Chen Mingshu's advisors, Wang Yixi and Hu Chuanyuan. On November the 20th of 1933, the National People's Provisional Congress convened at the South Parade Ground in Fuzhou, with thousands of soldiers, students, and merchants and workers in attendance. A banner reading, "China's National People's Provisional Congress," adorned the stage, and the leaders of the rebellion, including Chiang Kai, Zhuang Guangnai, and Li Jishen, were all present, though Chen Mingshu was absent due to illness. Representatives from 25 provinces and various walks of life gathered for the event. Before the meeting, the 19th Route Army's newly formed Air Force performed stunts to the applause of the crowd. At 9:40, the meeting began with Huang Qishan, who was elected chairman of the Presidentium, delivering an opening speech and reading the Declaration of the People's Rights of the Provisional Chinese People's Congress. Several prominent figures spoke, and the meeting concluded with the adoption of proposals to establish the People's Revolutionary Government and a new national flag designed by Ouyang Yuqian. That evening, the Presidentium decided to form the People's Revolutionary Government of the Republic of China, abolishing the Nanjing government, declaring 1933 as the first year of the new republic, and establishing Fuzhou as its capital. Li Jishen was elected president, and several others, including, of course, this long list I keep saying, Chen Mingshu, Jiang Gangnai, Chiang Kai, and all the others, they were appointed government members. However, the Fujian Revolution failed to gain any support from other forces within the KMT. The Guangxi clique was dissatisfied with the fact that the 19th Route Army reconciled with the CCP, so they did not support them. Chen Xitang tossed his lot in with Chiang Kai-shek, and he did not support the Fujian Revolution either. At the same time, the CCP was undergoing a power struggle. On December the 5th, the Central Committee of the CCP, headed by Wang Ming, issued a statement stating that the Fujian government was, quote, non-people and still non-revolutionary, and that anyone who wants to take a third way between revolution and counter-revolution will inevitably fail. Thus, Chiang Kai-shek transferred 8 divisions of the National Revolutionary Army into Fujian and coordinated the attack with the Air Force and Navy. The 19th Route Army quickly collapsed. 4 out of 5 armies defected before the battle even began. Most of them were disarmed by the Central Army that they had fought side by side with during the Shanghai incident a year ago. On January the 15th of 1934, Chiang Kai-shek's forces simply captured Fuzhou. The People's Revolutionary Government and the headquarters of the 19th Route Army retreated to Changzhou and Quanzhou. By January the 21st, both Quanzhou and Changzhou had fallen, and the Fujian Rebellion had completely collapsed. The People's Revolutionary Government of the Republic of China collapsed within just 2 months of its establishment. On the 21st, the remaining troops of the 19th Route Army switched over to supporting the central government, and the Fujian Revolution officially came to an end. Zhuang Guangnai, Chiang Kai, Chen Mingshu, and Li Jishen all fled for their lives to Hong Kong. The designation of the 19th Route Army of the National Revolutionary Army was cancelled, and the troops were dispersed and integrated. And yes, if you were wondering, this entire episode was basically a huge joke. The so-called revolutionaries were all a bunch of intellectuals who had no idea what they were doing. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all of that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube, and my new podcast titled Echoes of War, on all podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I just released a rather interesting podcast titled Dumb Moments of World War II. It was kind of a bender I did with one of my friends. As for Echoes of War, basically it's the same podcast, it's just we opened it to all walks of history. If you go over there right now, I have a 3-part series covering the Second Punic War from the viewpoints of Hannibal and Scipio. Also, if you'd like to support the channel further, please go check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account found over at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Joining either gets you access to the exclusive podcast with over 26 plus episodes and ongoing, the latest episode being me answering the question, who exactly financed World War I? The answer might surprise you. You also get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Yes, I do apologize for the bait and switch today. It was a bit of an anticlimactic event in the grand scheme of things. Yet the Provincial Rebellion was notable because the people involved wanted to fight the Japanese, and believed their government was not doing enough to challenge the external threat. It is just going to be one small rebellion in a league of other ones that's going to spring up as people are fed up with Chiang Kai-shek and what appears to be an appeasing government in the face of a Japanese empire.